Hi, Abe.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to start this session. We have a lot to talk about today.
I am excited too as well. There's a lot to talk about. That's right.
Okay, so just a brief introduction to everybody. I've been super excited to host Abe for a really long time because Abe offers something very, very interesting for startups. He's been on all sides of the startup equation, and I don't think it's an overestimation to say that you've worked with over 1,000 startups, right?
Overlooked, yes, definitely.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? So, definitely.
So, Abe, why don't you give us a little bit of your background in the entrepreneurship space?
Okay, so hi everybody. My name is Abe Seksek or Ibrahim Seksek. And I actually started my entrepreneurship journey in 1999, but really in MENA in around 2005, where we started our first venture in Jordan. And the company is still up and running and doing really well. And obviously moved into many other ventures from that in different verticals, and we addressed a lot of issues. And currently, after working from the startup side, obviously worked with both sides of the equation, both the
Hmm.
investor side
You've moved
and
to the accelerator side, right?
yeah, we've moved to an accelerator a year and a half ago, and I worked for Rainmaking, who globally owns Startup Bootcamp, and Startup Bootcamp is a known brand in the region and globally, actually, as we've accelerated over 900 companies globally in the last 10 years.
And how
But in
many
me,
have you accelerated, Abe?
so how many have in the last year and a half? I have ran programs and accelerated around 50 companies. And we have a portfolio of almost 90 companies in MENA, and 50 of them I can tell you that I worked very, very closely with,
Directly hands-on.
hands-on, exactly, and in different verticals too. So whether it's the fintech or whether it's sports tech or whether it's with smart city. So we've had different kind of verticals to understand the different types of businesses. And keep in mind, I didn't come from these verticals, but there was always the foundation of any startup that, which me and you will be talking about shortly, is what everybody needs to really build before they start building the actual product.
Right. So I know that we had marketed this session as 3 lessons learned from early stage startups, but as Abe and I were discussing it and running through our dry run earlier, we both had the idea that actually we can address all of those things and quite a lot more if we look at everything you need to know to put together your first pitch deck, right?
Yes.
And so through every single one of those slides, and Abe, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're able to dive deep into something for the first time for first time entrepreneurs that can be a little bit overwhelming. Am I right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so I was going to ask you to tell us what are the components of a successful pitch deck.
So the components of any successful pitch deck, especially at a very early stage company, and honestly, this applies to non-tech businesses as well. So if you're in an F&B business or in any kind of business, this also applies. So the first usually slide we like to see is the problem slide,
Mm-hmm.
we'll talk deeper into them, and then we'll talk about the second slide should be the solution, and then the third slide should be what differentiates you from
Mm-hmm.
the other people in the same space. And then we talk about the market size and
Yeah.
market in general. We can even talk about competitors there as well briefly. And then the slide number 5 is the team, the co-founding team, the founder, and who's helping the team. And the last slide, and by no very important, is the ask. What do you want this presentation to do, and where do you want it to take you? So,
Okay.
uh, so these are the 6 usually pillars of any pitch deck.
And so we had promised to talk about product market fit. And product market fit is one of those things that I think so many people use, and it's a term that I've heard so often. And so I just wanted to get Abe's unfiltered answers, no BS, to basically define. So Abe, what is a product market fit?
So, a product market fit is really very in one sentence, it's really validation of your value um, hypothesis or what are you trying to prove. So once you prove that the problem that you're pitching to the people is there, I think that is what when you find product market fit, and it's really the validation of the value hypothesis. So you obviously, when you're a startup, you have a lot of ideas, or when you come up with an idea, but you really need to define it into something. Once you define that, proving that point is product market fit.
Well, I'm an entrepreneur and I'm new. How do I know that I have product market fit?
Well, so there is there's a saying that I like to always share with my the people I'm helping out, is by Josh Porter, where he said, when you get to product market fit is when people sell it for you. So when
Okay.
so this is something that is very important. And now, how to get there is obviously the golden question,
Yeah.
because a lot of people, so usually start by going out there. Well, first of all, putting the hypothesis. So you put down the 3 points that you want to prove, and then doing your research. A lot of people don't do research. They think because their gut feeling says this is a very an
It's a
issue
great
that everybody.
idea.
It's a great idea, and it's a problem that everybody has. So you do your research, and then you come up with one or two or probably three hypotheses or items that you want to
Mhm.
address, and then you create a survey type of questions. And please, I do not like and I think people who have been in accelerators, they know I've said this a million times, don't send me a survey of like 30 and 50 questions. I will not do that. So make
My
them
family
very
and friends might do that.
yeah. And actually, that's something else which is very good that you've mentioned, that try not to send it to people who are, like, I know you would want some constructive feedback, and family and friends would be giving you that constructive feedback. But honestly, you want the honest truth, because you do not want to spend time and effort and money on something that, just because your parents or your family or your best friends or your friends will tell you, yeah, just go ahead and build it, and then people will come. The sad truth, that's not the case anymore. So find the exact who you want to target this to and send it out. And I'm not talking about a lot. These are the conversations that you have, these interviews. You're talking about 10 to 15 interviews maximum, just to validate, the high level hypothesis
To
to your.
understand how they work so that you can reverse engineer your product so it makes sense for your ideal customers' pain points, right?
Yes, exactly. And that's where, differentiate between the good and the bad feedback. So in my opinion, bad feedbacks would be the friends and family, but unless they work in the field that
Right.
you're trying to, you know what I mean? So I would always not take that as a, on a positive. And then also, don't fall into the trap of getting people to, telling you that you need to build 5 or 6 features for you to launch, because and then not they'll
Right.
sign
Then
up.
we'll never be
Because
done, right?
exactly. And that's the difference between, the whole agile and waterfall kind of development methods, where people used to build a big system and then release a patch every 6 months or something, while agile, you see constant
It's just in time, right?
exactly.
Um,
And from there, actually, from all this data, you get that aha moment, is where you really know what you need to target, and you find exactly the the hypothesis that we've been talking about that you need to prove.
and that
And
comes from understanding your users and having empathy for them, right? And designing for them.
yes, exactly. And you asked me a question earlier, is how do I know if we're there, right?
Yeah.
So, and I used to have what I personally did, and I'm sure other people have other formulas as well. There's usually 4 things that I usually go by.
Yeah.
The 40% rule, which is kind of an unwritten rule online, where if you're in a SaaS, especially business, If 40% of your users say they can't live without your product or service, that means you've hit product market fit. Number two is the sales cycle of actually getting a sale is much shorter. It's getting shorter and shorter. Number three, the deal value, the amount of billings.
So sorry, just to
Or,
recap, the
yeah,
sales cycle is the time it takes me to close a deal.
yes, from start to beginning,
Okay. But
So
that should decrease obviously as I get product market fit.
tremendously, you know what I mean?
Akid.
Like
Makes sense.
when we talked about personally with some of the startups I worked with, average time for a deal to close was around 9 months to a year,
Well,
honestly, because
depends on whether you're in the B2B or B2C space, right? Because obviously
yeah,
those are very different.
again, that's something that definitely we plays in fact a part of the whole formula. And then the actual deal size, like the actual contracts, are much bigger. You
Okay.
would attract bigger companies to sign up to your customer. You won't have these 5 to 10 employee companies if you're on the B2B aspect. um, then you'll start getting much bigger companies, 50 to 100 to 200 people.
Mm-hmm.
And the last and most important thing is your sales team start getting inbound calls and not outbound calls.
Right.
And not, you don't call them,
People
because
start
then
seeking me out.
exactly so it's and that's why the sales cycle drops, because the conversation goes from us pushing an item
Yeah.
to
To
somebody,
an inbound request.
so they
Right.
know exactly what they want, and they come in and they say, listen, this is what I want. So it's a much easier, much faster conversation to have.
I know we joke about this, but I do know that Abe has some product market fit myths that he shares with the companies that he works with.
Yeah.
What are the top 3 myths that you think is important for entrepreneurs to be aware of? The make or break ones.
Okay, so I have whoever has attended a scaling workshop of mine knows I have a big list of that, but these are the main three. Number one, if you have market fit in one market, doesn't mean that you have it in another. And it can be very geo-based. Like if you have product market fit in Dubai, you might not be product market fit in Abu Dhabi, depending on the population and depending on. So that's one key thing. People think that they have product market fit in UAE now. They want to jump into KSA or jump into another market. So that is a myth. So every product needs to be. Every market needs to be worked from the ground up. So you need to localize your offering. Myth number two, once you achieve product market fit, you can't lose it. That is, you have to constantly have these conversations. You have to constantly stay on top of your
Yeah.
game. You know what I mean? So this is, when we were kids, we were asked, would you like us to give you like 100% grade on your exam, or do you want to work for the 100%? And it's always easier to work towards 100 than maintaining 100, so you always have to work now twice as hard just to maintain your spot. And which also leads me to the next point, is once you have product market fit, you don't have to worry about competition. That is not true, because now you become technically
The
a
incumbents.
yeah, you become the bullseye, or everybody's trying to take shots at you, because now you're playing offense and defense, and this is a much tougher game, because when you're a contender, you only really go on attack, but you don't play as much defense as when you're the number one everybody's trying to take down. So that is very, very important when it comes to myths, and there's many, many more myths, especially when it comes to building the product and
So
stuff. But
Abe, I'm just conscious of time because we want to work through the different slides. So my question is if you were to put all of this on a slide, okay, for our fictional company, is what do those slides look like? So let's say Noor and Abe wanted to work together and set up an eyeglasses e-commerce in the UAE, right? Or in
okay.
MENA. What
Okay.
do those slides look like for us? The problem, the solution, and the differentiator.
So the problem is obviously, we haven't done our research yet, but it's we tackle the convenience aspect and the variety, right? So we say, instead of you going to the shop and then deciding and then giving the prescription and then coming to collect it after a couple of days, or so that whole that is the problem. So
Yeah.
both and then we can build some kind of augmented reality where you can upload a picture of
Yeah, we
you
will.
know, and then exactly, and then you can see how the frame would look like, you know what I mean,
On my face or your
on
face.
exactly. So that is that. The problem is we're trying to fix a the variety aspect plus the
The time
convenience
it
aspect.
takes.
The solution is how we're much quicker, we might be a bit better priced, and we have much more variety of options. Um so that's, and how do we differentiate ourselves now? That's the third slide where we talk about.
Yeah.
Then we talk about the technology, that we have an augmented reality platform where you can see the actual the glasses on your face or anything like that. So, and
What
we can
are good
talk about how much
examples?
faster we can deliver. And
What are
sorry.
good examples of differentiators? What could we possibly be differentiating on?
So you can differentiate on many aspects. Obviously, price is one of them. Variety is another one. Speed
Convenience.
and convenience is another one. Let's say if you can say, like, we can have glasses for you in the next business working day. That's something that's definitely.
You're competing with the 3-day cycle or a 4-day cycle of the traditional method, right?
Yes, exactly. You know what I mean? You can have, I've seen websites online that can do it in like 6 working hours. They'll have it to you as soon as possible. And another differentiator is customer service and after sales. That's, big companies like Zappos and online, or companies like Warby Parker. That's what they did. They really took care of the after service. So
Yeah.
every time you think about, well, in that case in Zappos, every time you thought about shoes, you always went to their site. And Warby Parker will be all about you thinking about having a new glasses. You'd go to them. They're top
Yeah.
mind. Anything that you're top mind in, you kind of have product market fit.
Very cool. Okay, so the next one is always a bit of a tricky one, particularly in MENA, right? Because our markets are so fragmented.
Sure.
And so I'm talking now about markets, market sizing, total addressable market. These are all things that we hear spoken about. But what do they mean and how do we do them? A market sizing exercise for MENA is the market sizing exercise for 17 different countries. صح? I'm doing them all
Yes.
separately. So help us think through that.
That is, like, honestly, everybody wants to go attack the big boy, right? So in the region. So, but as I said earlier, every market is its own, has to have its own market fit. So you have to address every market in MENA as a potential product. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's how it. So, and that's why you have a lot of companies focusing on like 2 to 3 countries, because it's really building 3 different products that would address them separately. That's how I would do it. And then I would gather data um, from either local economic departments or local even small consulting agencies or consulting agencies in general, to understand more about the market and what is the need there. And then I'll reach out to potential clients that you want to onboard
Mm-hmm.
to do that market fit, product market fit evaluation, or you do the interviews with these potential customers and take it from there. But every market really needs to be addressed separately, and that's why you don't see a lot of online tech companies addressing uh, all MENA 17 countries from
Doesn't make sense,
Morocco to.
right?
It's really difficult, and you need to be on the ground in a lot of times, because you need to have that experience. Sometimes face to face helps a lot.
Yeah.
People tend. This is a tip that I've learned. People in MENA are usually nice, so they do not want to really give you bad feedback. So they say, "Oh yeah, we'll try it if you build it," and those are not good answers. Just you
No,
want
they're not helpful they're not constructive and they don't help you iterate your product.
100%.
What's the difference, Abe, between your market sizing, and what is called the total addressable market, TAM?
Okay, so
Tricky one.
again, this is something that I was telling you earlier about. Is I personally do not like to see uh, pitch decks that have a total addressable market or a SAM, size of the market of a number in the trillions. That means usually people didn't find a number or they're lazy. We'd like to always like to have, like, let's say we're targeting UAE, there has to be some UAE numbers involved because we want to make sure that this is a market worth pursuing, and B, it is actually viable for such a product. You know what I mean? Sometimes, sometimes people say, we failed because of this or that. Simply just didn't have product market fit because there is no need in this market for such a product. Uh, so this is something very important. Now, the addressable market is what is your realistical shot at getting that percentage of that market,
Mm-hmm.
and and uh, a lot of people are very humble there, but there's a lot of people who are sometimes live in la la land. They say
I'm
I
going to
can.
take 100% of this humongous market, or
Yeah,
2%
yeah,
of this. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. The good ones are usually I want to be the dominant 50% player, which you know it can be done, but not in the next year or two, especially when.
Understood, of course, right? Because if it could have been done so quickly and so easily, it's like people saying, I don't have competitors. Either
Yeah,
you do have competitors, but you're not aware of them, or the market isn't exciting enough for other people to try and get in on it, right? It's not a good sign if nobody else is trying to.
yeah, and the thing is like and competitors is a very good point, because that sometimes you put that under the market as well, because we want to know who's in the space. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Because sometimes investors do get excited and do sometimes get scared of who the competitors are. You know what I mean?
Of
If you're,
course,
you
if
know what
it's
I
a
mean, like.
fragmented space that has a lot of other players in it, it's saturated. My eyeglass solution, there's 4 or 5 other ones, but maybe none that have our special VR software to
Exactly,
try on the
exactly,
glasses.
exactly,
Um,
exactly. So
I like
exactly.
seeing
So
them in motion.
yeah, and so and sometimes people put like monster player names. They'll put like for our example, they'll put frame companies and not actual like medical. They
Yeah,
won't put an optics company. They'll put like Prada and all of them, and you know what I mean. And again, this really shows a lot about
how the
the
entrepreneur
pitch.
is thinking about the problem.
Exactly, and that's usually either encouraging or discouraging depending on what the issue is.
Right.
So um, the market slide is very important, but honestly, it has to resonate with what we talked about in the first 3 slides. It has to flow. We talked about this earlier. When we're pitching, there has to be a good story to be pitched, and that's why you can go through the problem, solution, differentiator, the market, and now I know we're going to be talking about team, and then we're going to talk about the ask. But it has to flow. So the market has to be relevant to what you're trying to differentiate. You can't put your differentiators, you're an augmented reality for frames and for the face, and then talk about Prada being your competitor.
Yeah.
Those are two different avenues that you want to pursue.
Exactly. So let's move into the team slide, right? Because there's so much to team, right? When an investor is investing in you, first of all, you could pivot, right? So the market analysis isn't the most important thing. The most important thing is who are the people that are building it and what is the intellectual property? What is the IP? And IP is a function of, again, team, right? So what's Abe's guide to building out your first team, managing it, building your culture? I know you have a lot of very interesting opinions here.
Yeah, the team is like, listen, at an early stage startup, it's all about the differentiator and the team, because usually there is no revenues involved. So the team is very, very important. And there's like a couple of
It's make
pillars.
or break.
Yeah, exactly. There's a couple of pillars. The team, do they complement each other? Whether do they complement their blind spots? Do they play nice together? Are they on the same wavelength? You
What
know what I
does
mean?
complement their blind spots mean?
That means, you know what I mean? Like, you can't have as an example, 3 sales founders and non-people who've ever worked in operations
Yeah, it's the
or you know what I
commercial
mean?
technical breakdown that investors are often
Exactly.
speaking
You
about.
know what I mean? And everybody, like I remember when I used to work at Diviso, the founder used to say something that is very interesting, that, you know, tech companies are all about 2 things. It's about product and about sales. So those 2 have to play nice together, and then the
Yeah.
rest are support.
And as
So
people also, right? It's not just plain nice, but if you are an entrepreneur and you're super hot-headed, you need someone who's a little bit more chill, a little bit more laid back,
yeah,
to kind of bring
people
out
to
the best in
ground you.
each other.
You need people to ground you. Yeah, exactly. That's what, that's there's always guy that's in the back doing, all of that, and then there's always the face of the company. That dynamic is always very, very interesting, and it's very important. Also, in the team slide, I always like to see advisors. You know what I mean? People who
Of
reach
course.
out to advisors. Like, if you're an eyeglass, would love to have somebody from a brand like Warby Parker as an advisor to us, or somebody from Zeniopt in the US, or the big unicorns in that space. If that's just adds more credibility, because if they have this conversation on even an hour to 2 hours a month with this person, that's super valuable time in getting the team and the founder. And also keep in mind, storytelling comes back here as well, because you need to attract people uh, that speak the same language. You know what I mean?
What
They
does
need to
that
be,
mean?
uh, you know, obviously startups don't have that much money, so they can't attract talent when it comes to money purpose. So they
Well,
need
I
to
think
believe.
capital follows talent, not the other way around.
Uh, yes, but not at the early stage that we're talking
Correct.
about right now. So, once they start raising and they find an impressive team, that will come in. Then you can start hiring. Your first hire would be, somebody you can pay really well, but it would be that. But that at that
Somebody
the
who
level of
lives and breathes my
the values,
vision, the
the company
values, the
values.
passion, what we're building, right? There's a
You know
difference
what I mean?
between like a startup
Always look
team
for
member and an
people.
employee.
Exactly. Always look for people that want to take ownership. You know what I mean? Because you don't have time to micromanage or manage. Look for people who are driven. They're self-driven and self-motivated. These are the people that you're looking for, and that's what you see in the beginning.
I think more than anything is look for people who are driven by the vision, right? Because it doesn't necessarily matter where the founder is, of course, relevant always, but what are we building here? Where are we going? Why are we spending? We don't work 9 to 5, right? We work 9 to 12 on a weekend intensely.
Sure.
We're on all the time. We're not
Yeah.
on all the time because we want to be on. We're on all the time because we ultimately believe in what we're building, right? We feel
Yes,
the
exactly.
impact of the work that we do. And I think that's, from my experience at least, that's been the biggest differentiator of teams that make it versus teams that don't make it, is that the people live and breathe what they're doing.
Yes, I 100% agree. And when people believe and breathe, you know what I mean? That's it's a winning. Honestly, it's
And
always a
they're
winning
hard to
combination.
find, but I don't think we should settle.
No, I don't think so either. So
And in terms of culture, Abe, like, what do you think the most important thing? I know culture is this like super floaty concept, this abstract thing. What does culture mean? And like, what's the most important thing for entrepreneurs to note here?
I always had 2 things whenever I started a company when it comes to culture. I always said these 2 things. Uh, the only constant is change, because the company is always, especially at, when you go from 2 people to 4 people to 10 people to 20 people, there's going to be constant change of procedures, manuals,
Yeah.
even the product
Well, the
changes.
market, what we do, right? It
you
changes. I
know
mean, COVID changed a lot of things.
exactly. And the pivot, always expect the pivot. Every startup pivots.
How
So
many
that's the change.
startups of your 90 have you seen pivot?
I think almost all of them have pivoted
The good ones,
one
at
way.
least.
Yeah, I think all of them pivoted to one sort of product or an offering, or pivot into another market. They've all pivoted in the way of the thinking. And in COVID, a lot of people added a lot of other features that pivoted into
Solved
something, and they grew.
for specific
Yeah,
challenges, right? Because they
exactly.
understood who they were speaking to and why they were speaking to them.
Yes, exactly. So the pivot is a big part of the culture. And the second thing I always used to say, and this I think this is somebody I think Charles Schwab said that, who founded Schwab's, is culture always eats strategy for breakfast, because
I
it's what
think
we
it might
talked
have been
about.
Peter Drucker, but
It is Peter Drucker, actually. It is.
the point is taken.
Yeah, but the thing is that is very important, because we go back to your point where people are breathing the values, they're breathing, they really believe in the whole vision of
Because they
this
feel
company.
ownership, right? And ownership isn't as simple as ESOP. It's not as simple as, okay, I have shares, employee stock option pool.
Yep.
It's I own what I do, and it's not task management. Rather, it's like goal management. That's I'm working towards goals. I'm
Yep.
not working towards tasks.
100%. And it actually gives you like self-fulfillment as well. So this is something that will also help. Yeah, we'll see what happens from there.
Okay, thank you, Wael. And so the last one is about the ask. And the ask is a difficult one because it also includes valuation.
Yes.
So how do we think creatively about the ask, and how do we present it?
And I see a lot of companies struggle with the ask, because they don't know what they need to raise, and they don't know where they're going to spend it. And this is from an investor point of view. We said obviously raising money for growth is much easier than survival money. Like investors usually do not. Well, I can tell you, we do not like paying for salaries. So survival money is not something that is really easily. So, but now formulating what you need to talk about, or what you need to ask for. I can, like, from what I've been helping my startups, is usually half the money is for marketing, because you need to grow, and the only way people would know you, like you, when you open an actual shop, people might actually stop and stumble in, but online nobody's going to stumble into your website. You need to let people know, and you need to market, whether on the social, whether on performance marketing, whether influencer or whatever. So that is very, very important when it comes to in your ask. So 50% usually from the ask goes into marketing, and then usually another 20% goes into product, um, uh, um, development or update or
Well, how do
technical.
I know what I want to ask for and how much I should be asking for?
Okay, so what happens with that is once you determine an amount, so you calculate on a spreadsheet. You say, okay, I want to enter. Let's say I want our website, our e-commerce platform. Um, we wanted to buy, so we would need to spend this amount of money for the next year. So we would know how much money from a marketing point of view, and then we would put that as 50% at 50% or 30% depending. Then you'd say, I would want to hire 2 more developers to do this and 2 more developers to do that. And then operationally is the last chunk of what we're asking for. How much would we need to, get new offices legally, get registered, or like all of that good stuff. Put that in a spreadsheet with a run rate of usually a year to 2 years. And that's usually the ask. And I'm telling you right now, investors will never take anybody seriously, usually, if they're raised, especially if they're going to growth mode and asking for less than $250,000. Because even if you're at the early stage, you need to ask for, in my opinion, again, a minimum of $250,000. I personally always used to encourage people to ask for $500,000, because not all
Why?
the time Ah, okay. So the secret is you never, like, it's great that when you raise the 500,000, but you realistically need around 250 to 300K. And then when you get to 300K, you kind of close the round and keep it as is, and then take it to the, and then you float or whatever you need that money for the next 18 months or 24 months, or even 12 months. And then you start raising again. That's something that founders need to know, is you're constantly raising. Even when you close a round, it's the next round. You know what I mean? So there's no breathing space. And so that is going into your valuation
Right.
argument right now. And so accelerators did a really good job in MENA in defining the baseline of, especially because most of these businesses are only IP and founder based, because people really invest in who is pitching and what are they pitching. So that, you know what I mean? That depends. So there isn't really a really a general formula, but there is that sentiment of founder and knowledge plus IP, plus anything hardware related. Like if it's an IoT business or a hardware business,
It's a
there
different
is
ballgame.
it's a different ballgame because there's actual machinery people need to buy, or that. Or if you're, let's say you're like a delivery service, you need to buy like motorbikes, and you have a lot of salary capex, and you have a lot of licenses. You have to take licenses from the Dubai municipality, or you have to, so there's a lot of fixed costs onto that. So depending on how that, and that's why you've been hearing, especially on MAGNiTT, you guys been announcing these big logistics company have been taking big major rounds, is because they have major expenditure in capex. They have to buy machinery. They have to
Similar to
buy.
your renewable energy guys, right? Is that it's a lot more difficult to break into that space, to set up and grow in that space than e-commerce, for example.
Yes, I agree. So and that's what we that's the form. So again, different businesses get valued differently. Are you in a SaaS space? Are you in an e-commerce? Is it something that you have a patent for? Like we have a couple of companies in our portfolio that own patents about certain devices, and so those are valued differently because usually the patent adds tremendous value on top of that. Also, if you're a founder, a serial entrepreneur, uh, um, sometimes your network, are you did you work for a certain big conglomerate? You know what I mean? So that helps a lot because they know the investor would be more comfortable investing with a person like that knows that can open doors.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And also the valuation really depends on something that we haven't talked about, which is smart money and, let's call it, non-smart
Capital
money.
as a commodity.
Okay, capital as a commodity. That's a good one. Actually, I'm going to use that. People do get bigger discounts, especially if it's a smart money that can open doors into potentially more investment or more sales. If we brought in like somebody like a very big an optics company in the region, that would be a very smart investor because they would open doors to us, while a person that I know that has a bit of money that wants to give us those are two different kind of investments. So it varies, and I see a lot of people giving discounts on evaluations depending on how smart if this investment is,
Yes.
or how early, or that. So that's where we stand there when it comes to valuation. So there isn't that exact formula. It depends, and it's always what the investor wants to pay is determines the value of the company that you're running.
There's no formula.
There is no formula, you know what I mean? But now when you're making revenue, it's a totally different game. Then it becomes
multiples.
Yes.
We actually have 5 questions in already from our audience, and we can now start taking questions if people put them in the Q&A section. So the first question I think that we can kick off with is, how do we compensate advisors, and what is an adequate and acceptable level? Also, what kind of compensation plans are fair to founders between angel and Series A rounds as compared to what they were generating in previous jobs? So
okay.
A lot of questions in one.
Let's address the first part, like the advisors. What we've been doing and what I've been doing is the advisors usually come out of the Esop pool, unless it's an advisory role that actually they want like some kind of fixed engagement where they come in a day a week or 4 hours a week or something. Then it can be something very simple, like a cash, some kind of cash, or worst case, put them on a cap table. But I usually like to keep the cap table as clean as possible because that will help.
But put them on the cap table to the tune of what kind of percentage?
Like, again, it depends on how heavy this advisor, but I never saw an advisor that worked for a company for 4 years have more than 2%.
Okay,
That was
that's very clear.
that was very that is even tremendous. You know what I mean? But usually they take from the ESOP pool, and that's
Okay, and
usually
how
what.
big is the ESOP pool?
So investors are very comfortable with the 5% of the whole equity of the company as an ESOP pool. I've seen companies with 10 and 15% ESOP pool, but that depends on the, like what they're trying to do. If they're really trying to change, disrupt a major industry, or we see a bigger, uh, um, pool when it comes to the ESOP. And sorry, I didn't get the second part of the question. Sorry.
Oh, I've answered it. So we will move on. So I
Okay.
missed it here. If whoever wrote the question, if they want to resubmit it, we can ask it. Abe, what are your thoughts regarding bootstrapping?
I'm a big fan of bootstrapping. So I love bootstrapping. Well, that's from my entrepreneur days. I obviously had so many conversations with investors that in the end, it just, we wanted to determine exactly what is the bare minimum to get to an MVP. And honestly, guys, if usually raising money on a thought is now becoming semi-impossible, and so there you need to show an actual working product for an investor. Even accelerators these days do not take anybody usually on an idea phase. So there needs to be, so once you're bootstrapped to that level, then you'd know, then you're technically into growth mode, and the conversation really flips around with you and the investors. So I am a big fan of bootstrapping. Whatever you can in the beginning, you're a startup, whatever you can get people to help you here and there for free or for equity or for ESOP or whatever, take it, and then from there start, raising, and it's much an easier play from there.
Oh, we have the second part of the question from two people in the audience. So thank you both for sending that through. Abe, what kind of cash compensation plan is fair to founders between Angel and Series A round compared to what they were generating at their previous jobs?
Okay, this is a
yeah, the opportunity cost question.
Listen, exactly. It's exactly what Noor said. It's all about opportunity. So what we do, like actually, that's something even Rainmaking. One of our businesses is one of our verticals is we build ventures with corporates, and so we like I don't know. I was told stuff in Arabic that I can't say right now, but and they're not very they're very culturally maybe not proper. But what happens is again, I left a Fortune 5 company to start my first startup. Obviously, the startup did not pay anywhere near what I used to make, and that is the biggest dilemma. People think that the second, I can tell you, I thought of this in 2005 when I left I thought, 2-3 years, I'll drive a really nice car, I'll buy this, at that time it was like the fanciest Range Rover or whatever. So, but that's not the case. Entrepreneurs, you live poor. I'm sorry, but then the reward after, when you get to the Series A and the Series B, and as the series the level of wealth that you occur is much higher, and I'm
Then
talking
you
about
would have made earning a
yeah,
salary.
exactly. So there is no real proper answer, but I would say, again, you need to live comfortably, because when you live comfortably, you think properly. But forget the aspect of that, how the people tell you 20% of what you earn you need to save, and then whatever. So that all is all a luxury right now. You need to live on bare essentials. People used to tell me, like, I used to make $10,000 a month. What should I pay myself as an entrepreneur? I would say 3. You know what I mean? But then again, they'd say, I can't live at that. Well, you have to make some changes.
Yeah.
But again, that's not the rule. Again, depending on where, some people don't pay themselves. A lot of entrepreneur founders, I see them, they're not paying themselves, and they move into like shared co-working spaces and all of that because they want to save on. They don't want to get a fancy office, and that's fine. And that goes back to the bootstrapping aspect that we talked about earlier, and that's really, really important.
So we've got a couple of other questions. A couple of people have asked, what is the ESOP pool? The ESOP pool is the employee stock option pool. So actually,
Yes.
pool is redundant, but it's effectively what percent of shares you have available for your team, right? How much can you give as equity?
Yes.
And so here's a question that I myself am very curious to hear the answer to, Abe. What are your thoughts on where to invest if you're a new investor?
Okay. Well, this is a very good question because I do get a lot of investors asking me this, and I'm not a person usually that would invest in what's popular now. Like right now, obviously, logistics companies are very, very popular. I still say logistics will grow tremendously, especially in the last mile. Um, Getting last mile delivery companies, there is room there, but maybe possibly not in the UAE. There's quite a bit of players. Um, the the GCC and the MENA is craving anything in that field. I think cybersecurity is going to be something that is going to be super popular and super hot in the next couple of years. This is something that is, and COVID really proved it as other than logistics, more people started looking into the cybersecurity aspect. Um, a third, I still say fintechs have a bit of more growth. And by the way, we did open our fintech applications for everyone wants to apply.
Where are they hosted? They're hosted on MAGNiTT.
Okay. Fintech is still a very good area to look into. It's becoming a bit more mainstream, especially in the UAE, but I think more markets like Bahrain and KSA are opening up and welcoming the idea of fintechs as well, opening up. There's a couple of these verticals. I've been hearing a lot of cool stuff about space tech. So that's something that is popular. And I think I want to really know more. I'll tell you more, hopefully. But those are what's coming for the future. Obviously, things that are very, very competitive these days, that there is still markets in them, is the e-commerce marketplaces. But I think in the last 5 years, marketplaces have really grown to, there is a dominant player in every vertical in this region. And possibility of even hardware design and robotics is another avenue that people can look into because we want to automate a lot of the stuff. Factory automation is another major issue. And right now, educational technology. So educational technology is obviously for what happened with the pandemic, it's getting reworked.
Okay, so we have a couple of other questions that I hope we can get in before our time because we're already slightly over. So the question that I found really great that's in the chat, actually not in the Q&A, is what about exit possible scenarios? Do you see this mentioned in the deck or is it too early to address? And competition, do you want to see a slide about that?
Competition, if it's very relevant, yes. If it's not, if it's something that you're trying to disrupt, then no. And you do not want to put as a competitor as like Microsoft or an Oracle, because those are not your competitors. Usually pick on people maybe your size or 4 to 5 times bigger than you, but don't pick on like the exits. Never have it in a deck, but some investors ask like, where do you see yourself in 3 to 5 years? Obviously, a realistical answer in 3 years is a series, usually A, and then possibility of an exit, after that with a B or a C. But I'd never put anything because it shows that you're not really married to this idea or this company because you're thinking that, okay, this is something going to be quick, build this, sell it off, and move on. Usually you scare investors with that. So that's why I would never really, if they have it as a verbal, It's fine, but not as something hard in a pitch deck.
What do you advise on the equity split among founders if there are 4 members, for example? And how would you structure the vesting clause to encourage long-term commitment?
Okay, okay, so it depends on who is like coming up with the idea. And usually I've only done ventures where personally I had to have an equal share with everybody else. You know what I mean? But sometimes, you want to bring an operational co-founder, so somebody that knows the operational or logistics, and then, have that conversation can go really any way you want it. I've seen it done where they're given actual equity from day one. I've seen them where they've given a bit of the equity in day one, and then after a certain year, it vests every year to till like into 3 years or 4 years, it vests the whole amount agreed upon. I've seen co-founders get 1%, and I've seen co-founders get an equal share 50-50 split with the original idea owner. So it really depends on how you have to sit down with the people. But keep in mind, like, I always tell my startups this, owning 100% of nothing
Yeah.
sorry, owning 25% of something like $1 million worth is still better than 100% of zero. So
Yes.
that's
And here's a very good one that I don't really know the answer to either. How much does first mover advantage matter in the region? So if other competitors also enter the market within 6 to 12 months of your launch, if the first mover has not won the market, is it wide open to win?
Yes, it is. And personally, and I think everybody who's attended any of my seminars or my programs will tell you, I usually do not like to be first to market, because the first to market educates, and education means a lot of money spent on marketing, talking about what is there to prove before they talk about the product. And education becomes super, super expensive. And I know angel investors do not like to get into, usually the people I know, do not like to get into these kind of businesses because they know that they're going to be burning a lot of money. So there's always a competitor, a contender. And the thing is, as I said with the myth, it's good when somebody defines the market, then you can just say how you're a differentiator. The best example for that is the telco market. It's usually the first player comes in, talks about innovation, the second talks about differentiator, and the third is usually a price-driven competitor. So that's how usually. But the first one would have spent so much money on infrastructure and marketing to get it to that level. So it's not. I don't see as the first person to market as a clear advantage. I know you read a lot of the books where you need to be. But from what I saw in MENA, actually the number 2 always makes a good
Yeah, because
return
number
on
1
investment.
has done a
But
lot of work.
and everybody shoots at number 1. Nobody shoots at number 2.
Yeah.
Right?
And
So
our final question, because we're almost out of time, is what kind of documents can preserve founders' rights before actually registering the company? Are there any templates?
there's a lot of founders agreement that are spread over the web. Some of them are pretty good. We have our own template for a founders agreement that people can sign, because we've had a couple of idea phase companies come up to us that weren't registered in a company, so they can sign. You can talk to any legal firm, they'll give it to you, but there's a lot of templates online for free that you can get them. They're founders agreement, and they're usually pretty set,
Comprehensive?
and they're pretty comprehensive, but they're, again, you know what I mean, if I keep telling people, if the intention is there, so there will be problems.
It's the prenup versus like when you're getting married to somebody, right? Is if we're already thinking about the worst case scenarios before we marry that person.
Yeah, and that goes back to the team, right? So it goes back to know
The
who you're going to get
values that you
into.
were talking about.
Yes, exactly. So that's where I think, is there time for one more question?
I think we do have just 1 minute, okay? And it's the last question that we have. Actually, there's 2 follow-up questions. So I think that this one kind of explains a point that we were just discussing. Is on the point of founders getting paid. so not getting paid, but at least putting it on the books for later capitalizing them as shares later on. Does that work? So this is on founder compensation.
Yeah, and yeah, thank you, Karim, for this question. Again, it depends on your investors. Some investors agree to that. Some investors saying, no, well, I'm taking the risk on you. So
Take the risk on yourself.
I've had that happen to me in both scenarios happened to me in companies that I was actually founded. So, can we take can we make $1,000 now and then carry the rest over equity that, vests after a couple of years? Have that honest conversation with your founders, with your founding investors. If they agree to that, then I don't see because it is something that, eventually you do want to keep control of your company, and this is something that is very important. But again, it depends on what you want. It really depends on an investor, and I've seen it done, and I've seen it being rejected as well from certain investors saying no, if you don't want to do that, just go work in whatever you think you are.
And the final one is how much of ideas / startups in the region are copies of winners in the West? So copycats versus innovation.
So that is, there's nothing wrong with copycats, honestly, but copycats that actually that come in, yeah, they need to localize it. Like that's why, you don't see these major players from the States come in and and offer their service immediately. If they don't do the legwork and understanding how people and the users react to their product, they never make it big. I'll give you an example. A lot of there was at one time e-commerce websites that can ship to the US, from the US to UAE. But these guys, they understood that the whole logistics aspect was very, very complicated, and they either outsourced it or stopped offering it. There was a lot of these players. eBay is one of them. Yeah, I know you can get eBay now in the UAE, but in the beginning, it was they thought just opening a UAE website that just
would have solved their problem.
You know what I mean? We had the same issue with Craigslist when we were at Dubizzle. Craigslist wanted to open up in the UAE, but then again, their product is not geared towards the UAE, and that's why Dubizzle, localized the product and did that. So localization, there's nothing wrong with copycat an idea, but then localize it. If you localize it, that's brilliant in my opinion.
And that's a beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us for this webinar. I hope it was a useful session for you. I'm sorry we couldn't answer all of the questions. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Abe, for sharing all of these insights with us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you as always, and we look forward to the next one.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.